Matthew Goodwin-Freeman, maybe you could start with you. You're a Conservative councillor as well, I know. This point on Rachel Reeves, the Grinch Reeves, says the Mail on Sunday, stealing 45% of your donations. This is 45 pence, and every pound donated to charity will now effectively go to the government. National insurance rate adding another 1.4 billion to wage bills. So this analysis by the Mail on Sunday saying that there is so much of this charity cash going. I mean, many people giving money to charities, especially at Christmas, may well feel shortchanged.
Yeah, I mean, this just doesn't feel right for me. I don't know about you, Matthew, but Rachel the Grinch from accounts at Reeves, I mean, 45 pence in every pound donated to charity will now effectively go to the government. That just doesn't feel right.
What should they do? Because, and I suppose it's the question of where you draw the line as well, because if you look at, for example, let's take something that's maybe less emotive than charity giving, but something like GPs' practices.
Yep.
I mean, they are essentially private businesses, even though they supply services to the NHS. And should they have an exemption from these national insurance contributions from employers, especially when you have GPs who might be earning 120 grand a year?
GPs, hospices, it's been raised so many times in Parliament.
What do you think?
I think hospices, for example, should be exempt. I don't think they should be having these extra charges on them. But it just doesn't, honestly, for me, it doesn't feel right that what this government is doing is taking money from pensioners, taking money from farmers, now taking money from charities. I mean, charities are something where actually, you know, you all go in, you buy an extra mug you don't need for the cupboard and everything like that, and you say, yes, I'll do the gift aid because there's that bit extra money. Yep. But if you knew that half of that was going...
Gift aid is a way. I'm not saying I'm Mother Teresa, but I've just given a little bit of money to charity for Christmas, and that is, you know, you tick the gift aid thing, that's what you do, and that gives you some money back. Of course, there are huge pressures on the economy. Rachel Reeves would say that your party, the Conservative Party, actually left them in this situation, and this is what they've had to do.
I'm sure she would, and if she could point to any evidence that there actually was a £22 billion black hole, and if she could point to any evidence that actually giving bumper pay rises to the unions instead of actually fixing the economy, then I'd be happy to have that discussion with her.
Shouldn't she have ended the junior doctor strike? Shouldn't she have ended the ASLEF train workers strike?
More than happy to end a strike as long as you get better services at the end of it, instead of just paying out so that the strike stops. That's the difference between what we were doing as a government and what Labour were doing. We wouldn't stop the strikes if we weren't having better quality services. Labour went, what do you want? OK, fine, here you go.
Matthew Torbitt, what do you make of this issue?
Richard Reeves probably would say that, and she'd be right. We can talk about 22 billion black holes, numbers, whatever. Do any of you know anybody that feels better off at the moment than they did 14 years ago?
You can't just frame the well, no, absolutely. No one feels better off now than they did when the election was.
Well, you can frame it as 14 years or indeed the election. That is the question. It's a very pertinent question that Matthew asks in politics. Indeed, Ronald Reagan, very much the hero of many Conservatives, says that as well when he asked the question years ago and said, do you feel better off under the Republicans? Do you feel better off or not? And it's a reasonable question, is it not?
Well, what I would say is, you talk about 14 years. Well, actually, I'm more than happy to say the last few years have been a disaster. We had COVID, we had everything after that, we had the war in Ukraine. I completely get that in those years, people felt worse off. I completely get that. But you can't just blanket the last 14 years,
Okay, fine. I mean, you guys were in charge 14 years, but if we wanted to do the last 3 years, we can look at Liz Truss's...
I wasn't personally in charge.
No. You guys as in Matthew and Conservatives or whatever, I think you can look at the highest tax rate since post-war, cutting the arm...
Which is now increased.
No, I agree. I don't agree with that, but what I'm saying is decisions have got to be made by governments, and without sounding like some Labour Party apparatchik, you know, these decisions are always going to annoy people. Where I'd have probably differed from the Labour Party, and where I think political choices could be better made, is you could have not done this, you could have not cut the winter fuel allowance, and you could have not done the farmers, and what you could have done, personally, for those that have the most, is you could have put up corporation tax by 2%. That would have brought in £14 billion, and you would have had change to spare despite all of this. I think you
would have still hit businesses, though.
Absolutely, but you're going to hit somebody, unfortunately, because of the gaping hole in the economy.
The whole point that Rachel Reeves wants on how Labour have bet the farm is growth, and 2.5% growth, and you're not going to get 2.5% growth unless you make life easier for businesses big and small.
No, and that's why I was astounded that because interest rates are low, why she's not borrowed to invest. I think you need to use every lever you can. And I found it bizarre that in an election that we were so obviously going to win, even if you'd have probably done the winter fuel, then you'd have still romped home to victory, maybe not with a large enough majority, but you boxed yourself in with what is essentially your bread and butter on things like tax and national insurance. People were probably half expecting taxes to go up just because people are fed up of government and fed up of the country. And with regards to better services, I agree, but that ain't going to happen overnight. That's a long-term strategy because of the state of public
And we could have
services.
started by now. You know, or the thing I will agree with you there is what I find really frustrating is this was not in the manifesto or in the promises or in the pledges or in the discussions when we were having the general election. And it does feel
we were
like...
told everything was costed.
Yeah, well, it does feel like
Until they won the Treasury,
election.
remember?
They won the election on a bunch of promises, and then since day one it's been, right, here's our completely other mandate and what we're actually going to do. And that's what people are fed up with, and this is another thing.
Hang on a minute. Right. What promises? What did we promise?
You promised that you
promised nothing.
You promised you wouldn't increase national insurance. Then you said, oh well, we will increase it, but for businesses and employers, we won't increase it for everyone.
No, the
working people definition I love. The working people definition I love because by that logic, pensioners, farmers, and charity workers aren't working people.
No, I agree. That's why I thought it was a bizarre comparison to make. But my point is, you're saying things like you went in on a bunch of promises. The only thing I ever saw from the Labour Party during the general election was to promise to not be the Tories.
And then a lot of people are now saying actually they are, if not worse.
Yeah, but that's what I mean. There was no promises, and in fact the manifesto said very little unless you dug into it towards the back pages.
I remember bringing a print out of it here. It's the first time I've ever bothered to print out the Labour manifesto.
That's the whole point of this lack of political strategy. And I saw John Curtis say last week, Labour will not win without a vision. There's no vision, there's no story.
Do you feel there's a vision? Do you feel there's a story, Matthew?
I don't know, do you? I have no idea. I think this is the problem. Margaret Thatcher had a vision, she had a story, she had a background. Tony Blair had the same. Gordon Brown had similar, despite not really winning an election. I think without that, without a narrative, you can do all the work. They could get the 2.5% growth. We've just seen in America, you can do all the work on the economy unless people are feeling it, unless you're telling people.
Well, Keir
exactly
Starmer, I'm sure Matthew Goodwin-Freeman would say he's got a plan for change. You know, it's all fine. It's all, like, you know, problems, not pain now, but you know, there'll be things will be better later on.
But that's the problem. If you premise every conversation and every speech with things are going to be bad now, but then they're going to get better, and you're going to be, you know, like, if you premise, no, he's done it in every speech as a carbon copy robotic speech of, you know, I made tough decisions and this is this. Look, at the end of the day, you have to give people a vision, as we've all said. You have to give people something to hope towards, but you can't say you'll get that in the future, but right now, dipping into the pocket again.
I remember a very senior person in the Conservative government once saying to me that you need, as you say, hope, but also competence. Is there a sense that there's competence in your view as a former, as a person who worked for the Labour Party, not anymore, but Matthew Torbitt, do you feel there's competence? Do you feel, you know, as we were told when this election was happening, the adults are back in charge?
That tells you everything.
I think there's some competent people within the Labour Party and the Labour government. I think we are rapidly at risk of, well, we already are seen as a middle-class endeavour, supporting or being part of the Labour Party. I think we've dropped the ball with regards to reform because we've allowed them to be the arbiters of common sense speech, and actually that was what Labour always were. They were a party for the workers, they were a party for people, ordinary people that would have frustrations and hopes and whatever else, and at the moment that isn't the case. Do I think that can be turned around? Yeah, if you bring different people in. I think unfortunately across the political spectrum, can I add, we are surrounded by people that are totally out of touch, totally from all the same background, similar types of people, and without that. And I think we talk a lot about diversity, and I'm a big fan of diversity. I think it can work in many ways. The one element of diversity we never quite touch on, and I think is a massive barrier to getting on, but also to allowing other people to get on if you're advising politicians, is class.
Yeah,
totally and utterly social class.
Yeah.
And without that, we have, within number 10, and I don't hold it against people being privately educated, but you're only getting one understanding of life. You're privately educated, come from a wealthy background, white and male. And without that...
Angela Rayner's none of those things. She's Deputy Prime Minister.
She's not in number 10. I'm on about number 10 specifically. And if the message is coming from the top down, where you have a Prime Minister who was also very middle class but masquerades as a working class champion,
was his father a toolmaker? Sorry, I missed that.
Can we just check that, please?
I think he owned the tool shop. But,
he made a very big tool, I can tell you that.
I think there has to be drastic change of the people in and around you. And if you put your trust in the people...
Do you think he's going to survive?
I gave him 2 years on election night. I think the 2026 locals, along with Wales and Scotland, which we will lose both of. And I hate being this
crazy thing.
Doom and gloom disaster merchant. It's the way I see it. I speak to people back home. I speak to people all over. No, but everybody hates the government.
Yeah, and that's the crazy thing. We're so short into this.
Well, the question we're asking today is, who is your Christmas political Grinch? Who do you think is the one that should be spoken about? Who is the political Grinch of Christmas?